I have now addressed 3 of the Oxfraud reasons why Edward de Vere was not the author of the works of Shakespeare, which were that Shakespeare was not a pseudonym of Oxford's, Oxford was dead before a third of the works were written, and that there is no evidence whatsoever that Oxford was connected to the works. Now it's time to look at Oxfraud reason number 4. His writing and use of English eliminate Edward de Vere as a candidate. For this claim, Oxfraudians rely on the quality of the work written under Oxford's name when he was young, and indeed when he was younger his work wasn't as good as it was when he got older, which is to be expected for any writer, of course. Remember that the case for Shakespeare and the case for de Vere are both circumstantial, as I said in my previous video. As we'll see, there is very compelling circumstantial primary source evidence that Edward de Vere was highly regarded as a writer during his lifetime. No such evidence exists for Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon, and what Stratfordians and Oxfraudians do to explain this away is to use what I call special pleadings. Here's an example. I'll give several. Unlike every other author of the period, there is no contemporaneous evidence that Shakespeare was a writer. Answer: not a problem. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The man from Stratford consistently never spelled his name with an E after the K and never hyphenated it. Response: spelling wasn't consistent in Elizabethan times, and the hyphens are random. They don't mean anything. Well, I wouldn't say these 5 hyphenated spellings on just one page of the first folio are random, but that's just me. The first folio doesn't say the author was from Stratford. Response: he clearly was, because you have Stratford in one document in the first folio and Avon in another. The bust in Holy Trinity Church doesn't claim Shakespeare was an author, but posthumous evidence clearly shows he was. Why were there no books in Shakespeare's will? They would have been listed in inventories that haven't survived. Many authors didn't list books in their wills. Notice how this is unfalsifiable. How could we prove the answer was in something we have no evidence for? Okay then, why was there no mention in Shakespeare's will of cases, boxes or chests that would hold books? No artwork, maps or musical instruments? Oh, lots of other authors didn't list these items either. Well, that's true, but that isn't a reason for William of Stratford being the author, though, is it? Why did so many people who could have recorded details of his life fail to do so? Well, documents get lost. How did he gain his expert knowledge in the field of law? Well, he could have been an apprentice in a law firm during the lost years. How did he gain his expert knowledge in the field of medicine? He could have worked with a doctor during the lost years. How did he gain his expert knowledge of seamanship? He could have gone to sea during the lost years. How did he gain his expert knowledge of falconry, lawn tennis and bowling, geography, astronomy, rhetoric, science, Italy, music, politics, military tactics, seamanship, the Elizabethan court, art, etc.? Well, actually, he wasn't really an expert. He just threw terms around to make out he was, like Ben Jonson did. Why are so many of his plays set in Italy, 10 out of the 36, a country we have no record of him ever visiting? Well, he could have looked at maps or picked up stories from sailors in bars. How about some incontrovertible evidence for Shakespearean authorship, instead of reasons why the evidence doesn't exist? But I digress. Let's get back to reason number 4 by looking at what contemporaries said. In 1586, William Webb declared in A Discourse of English Poetry, "I may not omit the deserved commendations of many honourable and noble lords and gentlemen in Her Majesty's court, which in the rare devices of poetry have been, and yet are, most skilful, among whom the Right Honourable Earl of Oxford may challenge to himself the title of the most excellent among the rest." 1589, the anonymous author of The Art of English Poesy referred to courtly makers, noblemen, who have written excellently well, as it would appear if their doings could be found out and made public with the rest, of which number is first that noble gentleman Edward Earl of Oxford. In 1598 we have this from Francis Meres in Pallades Tamia, Wit's Treasury: "So the best for comedy among us be Edward Earl of Oxford." And Oxfraudians are quick to point out that Meres also says Shakespeare is among the best for comedy and tragedy, the point being, according to them, that Shakespeare and Oxford must have been different people, because they're on the same list. They cannot be referring to the same person. Well, for a contemporary counterexample of that, we have in 1977, The Shining and Rage were both on lists of bestsellers, both written by Stephen King, though he wrote Rage under the name of Richard Bachman. And of course we have many examples of modern authors using pseudonyms. Of the 29 authors on Meres' list, Oxford is the one and only bona fide dramatist whose plays have vanished. I state this simply as a fact. In my next video, I will address claim number 5, that Oxford's education and birth do not give him an advantage.